Sometimes, you may know this, all the motivation you need is someone telling you you can't do something. That's what's happened to our next guest as a teenager, except her rebellious reaction was to go scale a cliff. No equipment, no training, no adults, and apparently no problem. So began a lifelong love affair with climbing, one that would take Jan Redford through the mountains, marriage, and motherhood, with some devastating losses along the way. She's writing about it in End of the Rope, and she's our guest in studio this morning. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
All right, we opened up by saying sometimes it's somebody telling you you can't do something. That person for you was your dad saying climbing is men's work. Take us back to that day.
Well, I didn't respond well when anyone told me what to do, especially when they segregated men's and women's work. But I was such a tomboy. I wanted to be a boy. I wanted to do everything that a boy could. And I always wanted to be my dad, not my mom. And I wasn't really welcome into that world in the 60s. So I pushed myself into the world.
You sure did. Yeah. Tell us about what it was like to be a climber in the 80s, because it was a bit of a boys' club, and there was this idea that women didn't go climbing, men took them climbing.
Yeah, well, it was easy to find climbing partners, but I think I learned not to take myself seriously.
Is this you? This photograph here?
Yes.
That's incredible. Yes. How high up is that?
1,000 feet, I think.
Wow.
Or so. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, that's in Yosemite, the Lost Arrow Spire. So we were traversing across, Tyrolean traversing, yeah.
Amazing.
And this one, I'm actually doing a pendulum. I'm not just hanging there. You have to run across the face and get out to the side and grab. I must have been grabbing a crack. That was so long ago, I can't even remember.
Incredible. Yeah. What does that feel like, Jan?
It feels powerful, and there's so much freedom in the movement. It's like vertical gymnastics, so it feels very, if you're doing it right, it feels very graceful. And yeah, there's a lot of freedom in the movement. Yeah.
And I guess it wouldn't matter. You know, we were just talking about sort of gender differences in the 80s for men and for women, and I guess once you're up that high, boy, girl, man, woman doesn't matter.
Well, it's quite an equalizing sport because it has a lot to do with strength to weight ratios. So if you're light and strong, you can pull yourself up a lot more easily than a 200-pound guy could.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah.
Incredible. In your book, you write about some losses that you experienced as well. In your 20s, you had a boyfriend, Dan. He was killed. And then you write about the grief that followed. You dulled it with what you describe as Valium and wine and not eating properly. Going back to that younger version of yourself, what lessons did you learn during that time, and what would you share with yourself now?
Not to run away from your problems. They keep chasing you until you start dealing with them. So after Dan's death, I ran as fast as I could from the grief, and it came back to bite me many, many years ago, later. Yeah.
After Dan's death, you ended up getting close to his friend, who you titled Grant in the book, not his real name. You end up married. He goes to Pakistan on a climb. And there's a passage, and I'm going to read it, that gives some insight into some of the dangerous conditions that you were showing us pictures of. And the mindset of climbers, you write, they were like a special forces team, highly skilled, single-minded, tough beyond the norm, but they weren't fighting for any altruistic cause, like protection of their country. They created their own war zone and then launched themselves in.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with climbing like now?
I'm cautious. I don't climb as much as I did. I climb probably a dozen times a year. I go on the occasional trip. But no, I don't, it's not worth the loss to me anymore.
Does it feel the same now as it did in those pictures you were showing us earlier, that sense of freedom and grace that you were talking about? No, it doesn't? No,
I'm more scared than I was in those days. You know, the adrenaline turned into fear at one point, and it wasn't a good feeling after a while. So, yeah, and my climbing definitely suffered for it when the feeling changed.
You write figuratively about being at the end of your rope. you know, loss of marriage. You also write literally about being at the end of your rope and some of these incredible adventures that you've had on your climb. Why did you decide to write it all down in a book?
Because I have a tendency to repeat patterns in my life. I think we all do until we're aware of them. I wanted to be very aware of these patterns. I wanted to make sure, a lot of it, I wanted to make sure my demons didn't become my children's demons. Yeah.
Role modeling different behavior for them.
Yeah, yeah. I was breaking a cycle in our family, I believe. Yeah.
Good to have you here. Thank you for sharing these incredible pictures with us and your story as well.
Great. Thank you.
Good to meet you, Jan.
Yeah.